Hello and welcome to a deeper dive with me, Dara Cam. I am so excited to be back in the Terracotta Room this week with special guest Steve Bousquet, opinion editor and columnist at the Sentinel. We will take a deep dive into Florida House Representative Randy Fine and his very public break with Governor Ron DeSantis. And we'll talk about Governor DeSantis' presidential campaign. Stick with us. You don't want to miss Steve Bousquet. He's got the best radio voice ever.
We are moving into the next phase of one-party Republican control of Tallahassee. And this is something the Democrats were so good at for so long. This is the eating your young stage.
Right.
That's what they're doing.
You're listening to A Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by City and State, Florida.
Hello and welcome to A Deeper Dive with me, Dara Cam. I am so excited to be back in the Terracotta Room today with my broken wing and my very dear old friend. I say old not in age, but we go into the Wayback Machine. Steve Bousquet, the opinion editor and columnist at the Sentinel. Hey, Steve.
Hey, Dara.
Thanks for joining me.
Thanks a lot. This is fun. It's good to be with you.
Yeah. Steve's got a great radio voice because he does radio too. So he's going to make me sound very amateurish, but that's okay.
Yeah, I started out covering town council meetings in Rhode Island a very long time ago. That's how it started.
You spent a long time here as bureau chief for the St. Petersburg Times?
Right, and before that, the Herald, too.
And the Miami Herald. He knows a lot about South Florida, too, because you covered Broward County.
I did. Covered Broward County first for Channel 10 back in the Stone Age. Then I joined the Herald in the mid-'80s. Came up here to Tallahassee as a session reporter, and I said, I really like this place. I hadn't been to Tallahassee before. It's nothing like South Florida, as we know, but you're still in Florida. So you've got the tremendous amount of news and energy and absurdity and wild and craziness that you have about Florida, and you're in this very picturesque town with trees and hills that reminds me of my New England roots. That's basically it. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I grew up in Broward County, in the People's Republic of Broward.
Right.
Which is where the Sun Sentinel is based. So we've got a lot to talk about this week, and let's start with State Representative Randy Fine, a Brevard Republican who has carried some of Governor Ron DeSantis's most controversial legislation this year. This year or last year? Last year.
Right.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
The days run away from me like wild horses after spending 3 months in a wheelchair earlier this year. So Randy Fine sponsored the bill punishing Disney, and he sponsored the bill about banning gender-affirming care for transgender children. That's just two of the items.
Yeah, I think he's also, in the public mind, he's closely tied to this issue with drag queens and the drag show stuff.
That's right. The drag queens, right.
Yep.
And so this week, as we are recording this podcast, Randy Fine came out, and Randy Fine is also the only Republican Jewish member in the legislature, in the state legislature.
Right.
And he's running for Senate, and he wanted to be, or possibly still wants to be, president of Florida Atlantic University. So there's a lot going on with Randy Fine. And he came out this week and asked he has come out very pro-Israel and following the attacks by Hamas in Israel. He has really, he's a very strong proponent of Israel and really supporting retaliation against the Hamas militant group. So why don't you tell listeners what's gone on?
Yeah, what happened is that Randy Fine, who has been a stalwart supporter of Ron DeSantis, like you said, and who opened a lot of doors for him in the Jewish community when Jewish voters didn't have any idea who Ron DeSantis was. I'm talking about synagogues in places like Plantation and Coral Springs in Broward County. Randy Fine writes an op-ed for the Washington Times and basically says, I'm through with DeSantis. DeSantis has broken my heart. And the main reasons were that DeSantis took too lightly all this Nazi, street corner Nazi activity and hasn't been tough enough against anti-Semitism in the state. And that's pretty explosive stuff to drop on a governor in this state in the middle of a presidential campaign where DeSantis is still having trouble getting traction.
Yeah.
And I'd say this, Randy Fine is a, kind of a rhetorical, bomb thrower in the Capitol,
yes,
and very much likes to draw attention to himself. I mean, he's not the only legislator that's true of. And he kind of picked a really, strategically important time to do this. We're just before the next presidential debate.
That's right.
This, I think, is the DeSantis people came back and said, this was really, something like this is shameful theater is the expression that comes to mind. The reason for my audience, the bulk of my audience in Palm Beach and Broward counties, why this is a really big deal, is because of all this low-level noise about Randy Fine being supposedly a candidate for the presidency of Florida Atlantic University. He didn't get it. DeSantis was on the record encouraging him to apply. He didn't make the short list of 3 finalists. The state university system steps in and basically blows up the search, and now it's sort of in limbo. And this really sticks in my craw personally, and I'm sure yours too. We still don't know for a fact whether Randy Fine actually applied for that job. He's still finessing it.
That's right.
And that's because of a bill they passed in the Florida legislature that basically made presidential searches secret, and that's wrong.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's where
I had, by the way, if for listeners want to rewind, I had former Senator Jeff Brandes on my podcast and asked him if the way that he was the sponsor of that legislation, and asked him if he agreed with how these presidential searches are being carried out, and he said no, that he thinks they're defying the spirit of the law, and so there's that. But anyway, back to the DeSantis basically accused Randy Fine of being a sore loser because he said he didn't get the job,
right.
And so now he's like, he's retaliating against DeSantis for that.
Yep. This, we are moving into the next phase of one-party Republican control of Tallahassee. And this is something the Democrats were so good at for so long. This is the eating your young stage.
Right.
That's what they're doing.
Right. Which is what we're seeing in Washington right now, which is what they always are saying about how, they need to do it like we do. Like Washington, we're not like Washington because they are usually all singing from the same hymn book.
I've got to say one thing without necessarily agreeing with the substance of what Randy Fine said, although there's been a lot of criticism of DeSantis for being too silent about this Nazi stuff, really.
Yeah.
I mean, but I want to say this, that Randy Fine is one of the few Republicans we've seen stand up to Ron DeSantis and tell him to go pound sand.
Right.
And so you can talk about the political ramifications of it all day long, but one of the things that's broken down institutionally is that legislators will not challenge or question this guy.
They're afraid. They're scared to death of him.
They are.
Period. They're afraid he's going to primary them. That's one thing they're afraid of. They're afraid, all their projects will get vetoed, which they will anyway.
Randy Fine is from a very conservative part of the state, Brevard County, and he's got a long track record in the House. I think that he's got he's got a huge number of detractors, and they're everywhere. So people are going to come out of the woodwork if he has any sort of credible opposition. I don't know if he will. And so anyway, I bring that up because in the news stories about this Randy Fine Ron DeSantis battle, Randy Fine says things like members have been calling him saying they're envious because I wish I could speak out against DeSantis the way you have.
Right.
That's in some of the stories. That's interesting.
That is interesting. And he has really doubled down on his opposition to DeSantis. One of the things that he criticized the governor for was not making the universities use this law that he helped pass, that I think he signed in Israel on a trip to Israel with Randy Fine there, that allows universities to treat anti-Semitism in the same way that they would treat racism on campus. Am I anywhere close to that?
Yeah, I mean, that was a bill in the last session of the legislature sponsored mainly by a Republican member from Palm Beach County, a guy named Mike Caruso was the sponsor of that bill. And I remember going to the press conference where Randy Fine was very prominently a speaker at that, on the need for this legislation. It happened at a time when, and it probably is continuing, these horrible anti-Semitic flyers are showing up in mailboxes in Palm Beach and in Orlando and elsewhere. Terrible.
Okay,
Yeah.
so let me ask you this, though, because I've been seeing this on some of the social media, and it does also occur to me, so for Randy Fine to endorse Donald Trump, who said after the Charlottesville, the car drove through the crowd and the neo-Nazis were marching there, or white supremacists, I guess. There were good people on both sides.
Right.
Like, how do you reconcile your support for Donald Trump with that?
I don't know how you do that. I don't know all the details of this, but this looks like and seems like Randy Fine getting even with Ron DeSantis somehow. And so to hurt Ron DeSantis. Now, DeSantis's problems as a presidential candidate go way, way, way beyond whatever the Jewish community thinks about his chances. I don't understand. I mean, DeSantis, to many, we both know that most, I don't want to generalize, but I'd say most Jewish voters are liberal. I know there's a lot of Jewish voters who are Republican. I get that. But at least in my part of the state, Southeast, they're predominantly Democratic. And they are very cohesive and very determined voters. And DeSantis's positions on free speech, abortion, LGBTQ is all wrong for Jewish voters.
Absolutely. Particularly abortion. I have Jewish family members who actually, that issue alone pivoted them to support Democrats. And, most of my Jewish relatives are Democrats, but there were some who were Republicans, but they left the Republican Party and abandoned their support for Republican candidates over that one single issue.
Right.
So that was many years ago. I mean, I don't think you can really. So to what extent then does Randy Fine standing up for the, endorsing the candidate who is clearly the front runner in the presidential race, to what extent does that resonate? Does that hurt DeSantis in the primary or in any other way?
I don't think it does, really. I think it makes some people question, to the extent that in the public mind, Randy Fine is seen as a leader in the Jewish community. I'm not sure that that's a statewide perception that he has. Like I said, I mean, I think he's a culture warrior of the first order in the Florida House and has been for several years. I don't think this has much impact at all in the presidential campaign. But I think it's going to come back in a lot of unusual ways in the next legislative session, because one thing we know about Ron DeSantis is, he's got a long memory. He's going to remember this, that Randy Fine did this.
Oh, you're dead to me, Randy Fine. That's like he is dead to him.
And
he will never forget.
And Ron DeSantis will have innumerable opportunities to get even with him.
Yeah.
I mean, anything that comes across the transom that's a funding issue for Brevard County, or one of the issues that Randy Fine raised was DeSantis has dragged his feet on getting a Holocaust memorial built in the Capitol complex. And someone you and I both knew very well who died earlier this year was Steve Ufelder, the lawyer and civic activist. Steve Ufelder spent years and years working on that project to enormous frustration with the bureaucratic indifference, whatever you want to call it, just slow moving, and that Holocaust memorial still does not exist in Tallahassee.
Well, I believe there was some sort of event about that recently, trying to either like at a fundraiser for it or something. But yeah, still doesn't exist. So we don't know, it is interesting to see a Republican so vocally oppose DeSantis. I wanted to talk a little bit more about DeSantis staying sort of on the sidelines about the neo-Nazism and the anti-Semitism that we really are experiencing in the state. That I think I saw something where there has been an increase in anti-Semitic reports of anti-Semitism over the past year. And I'm wondering, when there's these Nazi flags they're waving in front of events where DeSantis is, and he said recently that he didn't want to elevate that because, and he actually, and this is something that Randy Fine tweeted, that one of the thing that bothered him the most in the governor's response to his comments was the governor saying that most of this stuff is fake, and that I don't think that people who are not Jewish maybe really fully understand the impact these cultural symbols, the swastika, the Nazi language, the anti-Semitic language, what's going on in Israel right now has on people who are Jewish or have Jewish heritage. It is a multi-generational trauma from the Holocaust, and deeply, deeply felt and resonates hard with Jewish people. So what say you about how the governor has responded to some of what we've seen?
Well, he's been much too quiet about it. Even the case that I remember, which is where a handful of these Nazis waved flags at an event in Tampa where DeSantis was speaking. I forget the event, but I remember seeing it and vividly, and it was widely covered. I've covered like the last 7 governors in this state, and they're all very different in their own way. But here's the thing. The thing is that almost everything a governor does, the governor of Florida, is almost by definition newsworthy. Almost anything, including not doing something.
What they don't do.
What they don't do is also newsworthy. And I feel as though Ron DeSantis didn't get the memo or didn't understand about the extremely significant symbolic nature of the job, which is what you say to the public on anything is enormously significant. And he had the burden and the absolute responsibility to come out quickly and forcefully and condemn this kind of behavior. And he didn't do it, and he didn't do it repeatedly, He uses the bully pulpit for a million other things, to go after Disney and to go after China and to go after, and he's well within his rights, of course, to do that. But this is what really people remember, and like you said it very well about the multi-generational trauma of seeing somebody is standing on Dale Mabry Highway waving a swastika, or that story we all covered where somebody shines something against a glass building in Jacksonville.
Yeah.
It's like it's horrible, and
it's horrible.
And it's the power of symbols to create hate. It's using symbols to create hate, and he has an absolute responsibility to forcefully speak out against that, and didn't. And that's what Randy Fine remembers, and a lot of other people. So
yeah, it's interesting. And we'll be right back with Sun Sentinel opinion editor and columnist Steve Bousquet.
Here at Deeper Dive, we want to hear from you, the listeners. We invite you to send your questions, comments, and feedback to our mailbag. You can reach us at deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. That's deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. Get your 2 cents in by sending us an email.
Welcome back to A Deeper Dive with Dara. Well, we'll see if Randy Fine is running for the Senate in 2024, that there is a Republican candidate in the primary. I can't remember her name. It's a woman. So he does have a primary opponent. We'll see if the governor does go ahead and recruit someone or back his opponent. But meanwhile, you recently did a piece. You just told me that you did a piece about DeSantis failing to gain traction in the GOP race for the presidential nomination. And as you noted, you've covered a lot of governors, you've covered a lot of presidential candidates. Florida is the 3rd largest state in the nation. I mean, one could argue that DeSantis has been campaigning since the day he got for president, since the day he got into the governor's mansion. But what's going on? Why is he so underwater?
Well, I mean, there's so many things to explore here. I'll try to be concise, but he never really confronted Trump directly, and I think maybe the media too is culpable here. Everybody has seemed to have underestimated the staying power of Trump's base.
But let's start.
Okay.
Let me start,
Okay.
because I should have set it up better.
Okay.
Because Trump takes credit for creating DeSantis, right? Trump endorsed DeSantis, who, as you and I both covered, that GOP primary for governor. He was not the establishment candidate. The establishment candidate was, at the time, Agriculture Commissioner Adam Putnam. So everyone really expected Adam Putnam to emerge as the GOP nominee and to be the governor. DeSantis gets the endorsement from Trump and wins his first election. Now, DeSantis, it appears, is trying to play this game or dance this dance of not criticizing Trump too hard because Trump is so popular with base voters, at the same time as trying to distinguish himself as either not Trump light or superior, preferable to Trump. Trump without the crazy, maybe. Anyway.
Yeah, well, about every week, DeSantis reinvents his campaign. Right. To the point where something I didn't think I'd see. DeSantis appearing on Morning Joe on MSNBC. DeSantis on CNN, DeSantis on Face the Nation, all these, quote, corporate media entities that he despises so much.
Legacy media.
Yeah, legacy media. And so he's, unless something changes dramatically, and I don't see it happening, this is not going to end well at all for Ron DeSantis. And it's going to end a lot sooner than he anticipates. Because more than ever, there's this sort of expectation that Trump's going to run away with the thing. And so even if DeSantis finishes a distant second, you can see, in the national media outlets, just a real eagerness to sort of write DeSantis's political obituary here. It's already been written in a lot of places.
One of the things you didn't mention, though, is he has this unlikability, and that's not Dara Cam saying it. It's been reported all over the place that he is not a great retail politician. He doesn't connect. You and I both covered Charlie Crist, who maybe was like the most effective retail politician, although he didn't translate into victories at the poll, but putting his hand on people's shoulder, looking in their eyes, acting, maybe possibly actually caring about them. DeSantis you don't get any of that. You don't
No.
get any warm fuzzies from him.
Not only that, no, I think your Charlie Crist analogy is great, but I think let's even compare DeSantis to Rick Scott.
Who everyone called Voldemort.
Right. And Rick Scott has got retail campaigning skills far in excess of anything DeSantis. Yeah. We've been to Rick Scott at that donut hole over in Destin, or places like that, or or Dunkin' Donuts and places like that. Scott understands the importance of that and trying to make that real for people.
Yeah.
He you know how it is. I mean, the candidate goes on to the next stop. That person who shook the candidate's hand will be talking about that for the next 30 years.
Yeah.
That I got to shake Ron DeSantis' hand
Yeah.
in Iowa. So that he's been a miserable failure at the whole retail part of this. I wrote a column for the Sun Sentinel about 6 months ago, which was obviously meant to be somewhat provocative, and the headline was "Why Ron DeSantis Will Never Be President," and it was basically built around this theme, which is that he's just sort of been so spectacularly disappointing on a one-on-one retail level. He's got 3 beautiful kids, a very vivacious and very his wife Casey, who's really a great campaigner.
Personable.
Yeah.
She's more personable.
She is, and so
But that's not. She's not who's showing up on the debate stage.
Right. So the parlor game in Tallahassee has been for weeks and weeks. What happens when DeSantis comes back to the Capitol with his tail between his legs?
When does he? What's the over and under for when does he get out? And how much? And how how angry is he? And what does he do when he comes back? What are you? You say it's a parlor game in Tallahassee. What are your thoughts about what he does?
My thinking is that Iowa, and my thinking is that New Hampshire will be his sort of Waterloo. I mean, that's the second stop in this whole situation. The Florida presidential primary isn't until March 19th, but it's really irrelevant because by all indications, Trump is going to wipe him out in the primary. Does DeSantis want to subject himself to that?
In his
to being
home
a
state.
sitting governor where he won by nearly 20 percentage points, getting annihilated.
Right. In his home state.
In his home state. It's the only thing we have any sort of, and it's not much, but the only thing remotely analogous to that is what Trump did to Marco Rubio in 2016. If you remember, Trump won every county except Miami-Dade.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. So
that's right.
I mean, he annihilated Marco Rubio, the state's senior senator. You know, so that's what DeSantis is facing.
Well, I mean, the one thing though that I was thinking, I also have been predicting that he will be out prior to the Florida primary. One thing though, with all of these people flipping on Donald Trump in these lawsuits now, working their way through federal court and Georgia state court. I mean, do we think that would have any impact? Do we think that any of those will gain traction enough to put Trump in a position where he's weakened, or I just don't. He won't be in prison. I don't think he'll be convicted of anything prior to Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, right? So how much will that really damage him?
No, I think it could. I think it's, and where you're going here is, does that open the door for Ron DeSantis?
Yeah.
And my thinking is, everything about DeSantis feels like it's on a downward trajectory. He's not going in the right direction. We're not seeing any even straws in the wind. There was a story the other day well, many stories. Ron DeSantis is running attack ads against Nikki Haley in New Hampshire. What?
Yeah.
Because he hears Nikki Haley's footsteps, of course.
They're vying for second place.
Right. And so that doesn't, the focus has to be on Trump. Now, I realize, the one candidate who's been foursquare against Trump from day one is Chris Christie, and he's going nowhere for lots of other different reasons we don't have time to discuss. But anyway, so, and so maybe DeSantis, that factored into his thinking as well. But I just don't, I think if Trump spectacularly fails or does something here, I think that the search will begin for somebody other than Trump or DeSantis. It won't. I don't buy the spin or the logic that if Trump crashes and burns, it's obviously going to be DeSantis as the nominee. I just think that I'm parroting something I know I've read somewhere. The more you see him, the less you like him.
Right.
Something like that. And so, we're getting back to that cliche about Al Gore and George W. Bush, and which one would you rather have a beer with?
I was thinking that the other day.
There is something to that. There is something to that idea, very much so. And so, there has to be, on some level, either he's like me. He cares about people like me. I think that somebody I could have a real conversation with. You just don't get that vibe from Ron DeSantis.
Let's talk a little bit about what's going on in insanity in Congress right now, and Florida's role in that. I mean, I had surgery the day I broke my wrist. Someone broke it for me, like 2 days before the attack in Israel. So I sat home until my surgery a couple days later, just glued to the news channels, and I have been doing a lot of that in my recovery over the past couple of weeks. And watching what's going on with this selection of a House Speaker has just been, this is for us as political, political analysts, it does not get more delicious and more frightening than this.
It's true. We've never seen anything like it. Hopefully we never will again, because it's fascinating to watch on one level, but it is horrible.
Horrifying.
For the country and for... This is exactly why Americans are losing respect for major institutions, because of what we're seeing in Congress. And now it's gone on for more than 3 weeks as we're talking here. And so maybe they'll coalesce around this guy, Mike Johnson from Louisiana.
Yeah, we're recording this on Wednesday, and right now that's what it looks like. But who knows?
Yeah, he's the least experienced. I read he would be the least experienced speaker in like 140 years.
Yeah.
And
all of this was, let's just note that this was all predicated by Florida Republican House member Matt Gaetz leading the charge to remove Kevin McCarthy as Speaker.
Right.
And now they're calling them the Gaetz Crazy Eights, the folks who are kind of the holdouts on any of the possible replacements for McCarthy, which include Florida Republican Byron Donalds, who would be the first black speaker, but who is just serving in his second term in the U.S. House.
My column last week was about, to your question about the role Florida's played in this. I thought it was interesting. There were four, with my opinion hat on, I thought that making Jim Jordan Speaker would have been a catastrophic thing for the country, and said so. And there were 4 members, Republicans in Florida, that helped stop that from happening. And that's Carlos Jimenez from Dade, Mario Diaz-Balart from Dade, John Rutherford, a congressman from Jacksonville, former sheriff over there, and Vern Buchanan, I think it was, the 4th, decided to cast a symbolic vote for Byron Donalds, who wasn't formally in the race yet. But anyway, so there's 4 right there. If this guy Johnson loses like 5 members, he's done. He won't be Speaker either. So it's that close, and you've got this split between ultra conservative, ultra right members and what used to be were centrists, or now what used to be conservatives are now centrists.
No, I know,
Yeah.
I know. It's really, in our lifetimes, watching the arc of this is so fascinating. I think it's interesting to see. It will be interesting to see to what degree the fringe element of the Republican Party how much control they have over what happens with this speaker choice. Clearly, they were able to remove the speaker in a historic vote, but now, because of the bullying and the death threats for members who didn't support their who was their their choice?
Well, the first choice was Steve Scalise. No, it was McCarthy, then Scalise,
Right.
then Jordan.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but because of the bullying and the death threats and I think some of the posturing, it seems like the quote unquote centrists, who are really hardcore conservatives, are saying like, wait a minute, you can't hijack our party. Like, is this the moment? Is this the tipping point for the Republicans to kind of maybe pivot a little bit towards the center?
I don't think so. And I don't know much about Johnson, but we're all going to learn a lot about him very quickly.
Sure.
But he is far, far to the right of most people, even in Congress.
Right.
He's a certified election denier.
Yeah.
He's a supporter of an abortion ban. He's the guy that said Nancy Pelosi should have been prosecuted for a felony for tearing up a copy of the State of the Union address, a
gosh.
symbolic
Right.
political thing. And so, I mean, he's from Shreveport, Louisiana, and so I did a tweet the other day that somebody put out there a picture of all the 9 people running, and of course Byron Donalds, as you said, Byron's African American. The others are all middle-aged white guys with white hair. And I said, this looks like the guy you see sitting at the gate at the Atlanta airport. That's what these guys all look like.
Yeah.
I mean, the sort of face in the crowd kind of person there's just nothing distinctive about any of them, really.
No,
no.
I mean, I never heard of. Be honest with you, I never heard of this guy until
Right.
this week. So,
I want to say something more about Randy Fine.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
What I was going to say was this, just to go down memory lane for a second. Think of all the legislators you and I have covered and watched through the years who've gone from the state house to the state senate, and how when you change from one chamber to the other, you wouldn't think it'd be that big a deal, but it is a big deal. You have to temperamentally change the way you approach issues. The Senate's a very different institution than the House is.
you represent a lot more people. First of all, your district is much larger.
You certainly do. And the Senate has, you could argue that it's declined, but the Senate has a long, rich history of more of a coalition, member-to-member sort of, even though we might be of different parties, I just jotted down these names. Debbie Wasserman Schultz went from the State House to the Senate. Danny Webster, Mario Diaz-Balart, many, many others.
Yeah.
And Randy Fine is going to make that walk. And, the antics and the stuff that we've seen from him in the House is just not going to be welcomed in the Florida Senate. That's my opinion.
I've heard that that they have been trying to recruit someone to run against him, but he is so trying to find a polite way of saying this. He has a reputation for being a bully. Although he often talks about being bullied as a child growing up, but he has a reputation in the political world of being a bully. Is that am I correct to say that?
No, not absolutely. The stuff that he did to Jennifer Jenkins, that Brevard
Yes,
school board member,
that's
was
right.
horrible.
That's right. So I think there are candidates that they're having a hard time recruiting someone to run against him because they're afraid of him. That's what I've heard from sources.
Sad, but that's what politics has become in this state and in this country to some degree. I mean, it's completely changed, and so we'll see. But I think, as I pointed out in that radio piece that I did for NPR on DeSantis's campaign, the Iowa caucuses are January 15th, which is the beginning of the second week of the legislative session. When the legislature's not in session for very long in the state, and when they are in session, you know what? You kind of expect the governor to be around.
I know.
Yeah, he's going to have to be in Iowa.
I don't think he really played a big role in the last legislative session in front of the cameras, though. Like, he isn't a governor. Remember Jeb Bush used to walk the halls. We would see him walking the halls, going into lawmakers' offices. I don't remember DeSantis ever doing that.
I don't either. I don't know that it ever went on. That's a good point you make. I mean, Jeb had dysfunctional legislative leadership to deal with some of the tenure there. Think of Rick Scott. What did Rick Scott do? Rick Scott ran TV ads in members' districts
That's right.
saying, tell Richard Corcoran not
That's
to blow
right.
up Enterprise, Florida,
That's
right? Stuff
right.
like that. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
He did
I forgot about
he
that.
did that stuff. And so the idea of the legislature and the governor, at loggerheads, not only is important, but I say it's necessary. I'll take my share of responsibility for the stories I've written through the years that have said, tisk, tisk, oh, look at these guys. They're in the same political party and they can't even get along.
Right.
I think I misread it in some ways. They're supposed to challenge each other.
Yeah.
And of course, the greatest example in my experience that I can come up with that's handy, that's recent and relevant, is Rick Scott telling the Republican Senate, I'm going to privatize most of the prisons in the state. He didn't vet it. He didn't work it. He didn't try to build a coalition of support. He just sort of flung it on them, and they stuffed it down his throat,
Yeah.
and they didn't do it.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I have spoken a lot about this among my friends and on the podcast. Until now, and possibly still now, Governor DeSantis controls 3 branches of government in Florida. The legislature caved to him on the congressional map and has not really has gone along with all of his agenda. Privately, I hear from legislative leaders on the Senate side particularly that they watered down some of the things that he wanted to do over the past 4 years. But let's face it, I mean, he wants anti-trans stuff, he gets anti-trans stuff. He wants anti-drag show stuff, he gets anti-drag show stuff. He wants to kill Disney or whatever he wants to do to punish Disney, he punishes Disney. I mean, I could go on and on. He wants to do away with, he wants to reinvent higher education.
Yeah.
He does.
Immigrants.
Immigration, the way that we can talk about racism in schools. I mean, that's a major deal. He has gotten all of it. So he controls the legislature. He controls, obviously, the cabinet. I won't say he controls the cabinet, but he is a very powerful governor. They don't even bother to have many cabinet meetings nowadays. And he has appointed the majority of justices, I think all but 2 of the 7 justices on the Florida Supreme Court. Now, there is an effort to try to, he has removed, oh, by the way, 2 Democratic state attorneys from office, suspended them. And there is a move afoot to consolidate the judicial districts,
Right.
which seems to be very contrary to the expansion of the state appellate districts, which happened just last year. So everyone has come out in opposition to that. So that would, I mean, this is a governor who has, and I think, is ruling this state with somewhat of an iron fist.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, sure. And that's why it's important and necessary for the legislature to be a check on that, because, they've got a lot of power. They've got the power of the purse. Yes, I know he can line item veto stuff. But the legislature's real power comes from its power to appropriate money.
So are they going to?
Well,
are they going to stand up to him, do you think? Or do you think he's going to wield the same level
My prediction is they're going to stand up to him, but it's going to be mild. And
subtle.
It's going to be subtle. It's going to be very strategic. This is the last year of Speaker Paul Renner and Senate President Kathleen Passidomo. We know how the culture works in Tallahassee, that by now the sense of power and inevitability is already shifting to the next
Yes.
leaders. It's just the way it happens.
Yes, Danny Perez in the House and Senator Ben Albritton.
Right. So, Danny Perez made some waves with his remarks during a coronation that seemed to some to be sort of challenging the governor a little bit. I don't know.
I know. He went dialing for dollars for DeSantis like a couple days after that.
Okay.
So.
We both know that the real challenge, the difficulty, the savvier politicians generally are in the Senate. They've got more experience. They're older. They've been around a little bit longer.
I think I don't want to be a naysayer, but we had what Brandes told me. It's the houseification of the Senate. A lot of members have come over from the House, and they're members that were backed by DeSantis. So if we keep seeing that, is it true that the Senate is what do they call it? It's the saucer that cools the tea or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just think it'll be interesting to watch. Well, listen, thank you so. What? Steve's laughing.
No, it's all right. Yeah.
Was there something else?
Just that the thought you mentioned Jeff Brandes.
Yeah.
Jeff Brandes. We used to talk about this, and it's an old expression about. You've got 40 senators, and they were called Somalian warlords.
Yeah, 40 Somalian warlords.
A House member gets up in the morning, adjusts his tie in the mirror, and says to himself, I could be speaker one day. A senator adjusts his tie. I'm sorry, this is a male. I don't mean for this to be a male analogy, but just first thing that comes to mind. A senator adjusts his tie in the mirror and looks in the mirror and says, I could be governor. That's the difference. The difference is senators see themselves as potential governors. So,
when was the last time we had a state senator elected governor?
It was Charlie Crist,
Right.
I think. One time, yeah.
Okay.
So it's happened, but
40 Somali warlords. All right. Well, listen, It's been so much fun having my old buddy, Steve Bousquet. We've done the Steve and Dara show before. We've taken it on the road, in fact. So I hope you promise to come back soon and visit with us, and we'll see how accurate our predictions were.
Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks, Dara.
A Deeper Dive with Dara is a podcast by City and State Florida, hosted by Dara Cam, produced by Ryan Daly, and music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs, LLC, and performed by Ryan Daly and Danny Reyes.